This is part 2 of Fred and Rose West. 15-year-old Rose Letts was living in Bishop's Cleeve. She was gallivanting around the town, meeting older men and basically sleeping with them, while Fred was still living with Rena and the kids. One day, 37-year-old Fred and 15-year-old Rose just happened to be stood waiting at the same bus stop in Bishop's Cleeve. Fred stood at the other side of the stop staring at Rose with her short skirt on and decided he would try his charms on her. Smiling and asking her how she was, Rose took one look at Fred and thought that his teeth looked green and ganky and didn't like him at all. She gave him the look as if to say, just go away. And when the bus arrived, Fred and Rose got on. But by the end of the journey, the two had started to get to know each other. Fred's charms seemed to have worked. Fred wooed Rose with extravagant gifts that she was just not used to getting from men, such as lace dresses and fur coats. Rose asked Fred if he was married, and he told her that his wife Lena was a street girl and was living in Glasgow. Rena was still around, but due to another of the couple's crazy rows, she had left again to go visit family in Scotland. The kids, however, had still been living with Fred at the caravan. Fred would invite Rose back to the caravan and she met the children. At first, she was shocked by the filthy nature of the home. It was a stark contrast to the very tidy, clean home that she'd grown up in. It seemed that Rose was now a regular visitor to the caravan. Rose's father could tell that he was losing his daughter. They had been very close since she was small. Now she was spending so much time away, and he knew why. But Rose told her father that Fred had offered to pay for her babysitting, as it was just a job, but her father knew that that was a lie. It turned into a big argument, with Rose starting to spend all of her time at Fred's. She was introduced to his family, his brothers and sisters, as nanny to the children, but they did not get on with her at all, calling her loud and obnoxious and how she used to have to be in charge. Over a period of time, Fred introduced Rose to also walking the streets and seemed to enjoy the idea of her doing it. It brought in extra money. When Rose's father found out that she was doing this, he was mortified and so angry, telling her that if she saw Fred again, he would disown her for good. But Rose chose Fred. She packed her bags and fled to the caravan. Not long after this, and after becoming lovers, Rose was suddenly pregnant with Fred's child. But life, being a pregnant full-time mum to Fred's kids, was not all it was cracked up to be. And it was not long before Rose started to get annoyed with the children. She hit them regularly and could get quite violent with them, especially Charmaine. It seemed that Anne-Marie, Fred's daughter, knew when to keep quiet and knew what to say. She would also run off, but for some reason, it always seemed to be Charmaine that got the brunt of Rose's anger. In the spring of 1970, Rena returned home to the caravan. She did not look shocked when she knocked on the door and Rose answered. She told Rose that she was there for her daughters. Now, it's not known to this day what the conversation between Rose and Rena was, but it was known that Rena was there to pick up her kids. But for some reason, despite not liking or having time for the kids, Rose kept the children and Rena ended up leaving without them. It was almost like the kids were just an object of power to Rose. In June 1970, Fred and Rose moved out of the caravan, moving into a rented flat on Midland Road in Gloucester. Not long after this, Rose gave birth to a daughter that the couple named Heather. Struggling for money and now under new financial pressures due to the size of their family, Fred resorted to stealing, which later that year saw Fred starting his 9-month prison sentence. This meant that Rose was now at home with 3 children. She struggled to cope, and Charmaine seemed to get the brunt of her stress. The little girls, who now felt abandoned by their own mother, would tell each other that one day Mummy would come and rescue them. In March 1971, Charmaine was taken to Gloucester Hospital with an ankle injury. Although it looked like it had been made by a knife, this was not thoroughly looked into afterwards, and this was possibly the last opportunity for this little girl to be rescued. Fred and Rose sent each other loving letters backwards and forwards each week. In one letter, Rose told Fred, "About Shah, I think she likes being handled a bit rough, but why am I the one who has to do it?" Then in June 1971, just days before Fred was set for release, Rose's temper would again spiral out of control. That afternoon, she murdered 8-year-old Charmaine in the flat in Gloucester. Rose never explained later what actually happened that day or what she did to her, but that day ended Charmaine's life. When little Anne-Marie arrived home from school that day, she asked where Charmaine was, but Rose told her that her mother had turned up and taken her away, possibly leaving Anne-Marie wondering why Mummy did not come and take her too. This is a lie that she would go along with telling neighbours and friends' parents for a very long time. When Fred was released from prison only days later, he obviously wondered where Charmaine was, and it was said that Rose told him at this point what had happened. There is no evidence to suggest that Fred was angry with Rose, and it's possibly here that he also told her about Anna McFall. From that moment on, they both had guilt, and they had both something over each other, almost like it had brought them closer together. Fred got a shovel and buried Charmaine behind the flat. Fred always later denied dismembering her body, although the facts would later show that this was a lie. Now Rena was back in town and looking for her children. Of course, the couple were no longer in the caravan, so Rena had to visit his family, asking questions to find out where Fred had moved to. This was not something that the couple needed, someone asking questions, especially when she would soon be asking questions about where Charmaine was. So Fred agreed to meet Rena on a country road and take her to the children. This was one meeting that was not going to end well. That day, it was said that Fred got Rena drunk before murdering her on the back seat of his car. Fred then took her back to the flat and dismembered her, before burying in a field next door to where Anna McFall's body was also later found. Now he had no one asking questions, and the couple could stick to their story about Charmaine living with her mother in Scotland. Fred and Rose married in 1972 and went off on honeymoon, but not alone. Rose was now 18, and the couple had picked up a blonde girl in a local pub. As Rose had fantasies about being with women, they had taken this girl with them on honeymoon. But now Rose was pregnant again for the second time. They wanted a bigger home for their growing family, so the couple then moved into number 25 Cromwell Street, the name of the road most poignant in this case. The house was quite big, so the couple hired out rooms within the house to make extra money. Before long, Rose was stripping off and jumping into bed with these random men and women who were renting rooms. It seemed like everyone in the house was just jumping in and out of bed with each other, almost like a huge orgy. Rose seemed to be the most dominant in the relationship. She enjoyed men's and sleeping with women in equal measure, and Fred's role seemed to be to assist her. Fred would do odd jobs for people to make money. He came across as a happy, bumbling man who took an interest in people. When he found out that one of his neighbours was into sleeping with women, he offered her to come round to meet Rose, as she enjoyed that also. So one day, Catherine came round to the house. She was drinking a cup of tea when Rose, completely naked, stood in the doorway to the room, just looking at her. Rose walked in and draped herself over Catherine. Apparently, according to the neighbour, Rose came across as dominant and confident. The two girls had sex, with Fred in the room the whole time, watching. Catherine came back to the house for several sessions, although she described it as cold and literally sex, nothing more. And when she slept with Fred, she described him as more gentle. Not long after this, Fred started converting the basement of his property into a type of sex dungeon with whips and chains hanging against the walls. It looked like a type of torture chamber. One of the first people Fred took down there was his own daughter Anne-Marie. Can you imagine how scary a basement is to a young child? And even more so with what he'd done down there. And this happened regularly. Anne-Marie was taken and chained up while Rose and Fred took it in turns to do things to her. They told her that she should be grateful. Fred would tell her that as her father, it was up to him to break her in and couldn't let any other random man do that. In 1972, the couple met a young woman called Catherine Owens. She had been hitchhiking back to her family home after being at her boyfriend's house when Fred and Rose West had picked her up. It was as if they were trawling the countryside looking for lone female hitchhikers to join their dungeon antics. Fred and Rose came across as happy-go-lucky, easy to talk to, while Caroline discussed that she was looking for work, and Rose had been quick to offer a nanny position at Cromwell Street. At first the couple seemed nice and Caroline was so happy about the arrangement, but during her stay there strange things would happen, like Rose would just walk into the bathroom while Caroline was in the bath, and Fred would tell her that he performed abortions on people. And the nanny would start seeing signs of aggression and stress directed at Anne-Marie, the young child. Until one day, Fred told the nanny that Anne-Marie was not a virgin. Anne-Marie was in the room, and she was so embarrassed she bowed her head. The nanny was shocked and got quite frustrated with Fred, asking him what he meant as he started to backpedal, talking about how it was nothing like what she was thinking and she'd just been on a bike when the saddle had slipped off and penetrated her. It all seemed not right, and the nanny was starting to question a lot of things and feel very uncomfortable. Then one day, the nanny Caroline slept with one of the lodgers that was renting a room, and Fred found out. He started to threaten her, saying that he would tell her boyfriend what she'd been getting up to, but he would soon retract all of this. One day he told her that Rose and himself had an sex circle and wondered if he would be interested in joining. But just weeks after taking the job, the nanny walked out of the West's house with her bag. She really did not want any part of anything they had to offer. She was not happy with the way they spoke, the things they did, and the way they treated their daughter. After the nanny had left, Rose was angry. She wanted to sleep with Catherine and was frustrated, telling Fred, "We have to get her back here." One evening, as the nanny was hitchhiking a lift back home, the couple came by as if they just knew where she was going to be. The plan that night was to have sex with Caroline and take her life. The couple would tell her that they really missed her and wanted her back, and not knowing any better, the nanny got in. The nanny and the couple, with their new daughter and Anne-Marie, went to the laundrette. The nanny made up an excuse about going next door to buy cigarettes and never returned. The nanny's mother told her to go to the police and a statement was taken. But despite it not going to court, as the nanny did not want to go through all of that, the couple had now learned that next time they could not afford to let the girl go. Over the next 9 months, 3 girls would lose their lives in Cromwell Street as the couple lived out their fantasies on them within their sex dungeon. They used various items to torture the girls. They were bound and gagged until they lost their lives. They were then dismembered and hidden under the cellar floor. The names of these girls were 19-year-old Linda Goff, who they used the nanny technique on, 15-year-old Caroline Ann Cooper, who lived in a children's home, and 21-year-old Lucy Partington, a university student living with her mother. All 3 were individually lured to the home and lost their lives within the cellar. In 1974 came another victim, Teresa Seekenthaler. She was a Swiss sociology student. The Wests had by now worked out how to smoothly abduct, disarm, kill and hide the bodies without anyone being able to trace the victims. That November, 15-year-old Shirley Hubbard, a girl who had lived in a care home, had been hitchhiking and had also been picked up by the couple. She was bound and gagged, she had been tortured and sex assaulted before the couple encased her in a type of cement cocoon beneath the floor to muffle her cries, with only a piece of piping to help her breathe. She later died and was also hidden beneath the concrete. Months later, Juanita Mott from a broken home was also picked up after pretty much the same fate as the others. She had now been the fifth body to be buried within the cellar floor. The floor was now full. By now, Anne-Marie was 12 years of age, and the couple had started selling her out as like her PIMPS. They would meet men in pubs and bring them back home in order for them to sleep with her. And it was also believed that the couple were physically attacking the children, as they were taken to hospital a total of 31 times. Then a young 18-year-old girl named Shirley Robinson came to the home to rent out a room. It wasn't long before the couple started flirting with her, and the girl started sleeping with the couple, but more so Fred. Shirley then came to Fred one day and told him that she was pregnant with his baby. Shirley had been kept alive as Fred really liked her, but Rose was starting to feel quite threatened by Shirley being there, and at one point felt that Fred was going to leave her for Shirley. As Shirley became further along in her pregnancy, Rose started to feel more and more abandoned by Fred. Until 8.5 months along, and she was murdered in a frenzy. Her body was later found smashed apart, possibly using an axe, as very little remained. In 1979, 16-year-old Alison Chambers, who lived in a care home, had started chatting to a man who was seen hanging around outside where she lived. He was offering lifts to young girls. Now, Alison was murdered one day that August. A belt had been wrapped around her head and neck, and it was found still in place years later when she was found. By 1987, there were 8 children living in the home. Tensions were high, and Fred was trying to sleep with Heather, one of his daughters, until one day the children came home and wondered where Heather was. Heather, their own child, had been another one of the couple's victims, buried in the garden under a patio. For 2 decades, Fred and Rose West had evaded justice, but things were about to catch up with them. In August 1982, a young girl had called police to report that Fred had RAPED'd her. She told how Fred had even filmed it. When police arrived at Cromwell Street that day, the Wests' 5 children were at home also. Although Fred seemed composed, Rose lost the absolute plot, pushing officers and getting quite violent towards them, having to be restrained. The children were quickly taken into care. Rose was arrested, and as officers started their search of the home, Fred went off to work as usual, like there was nothing wrong. During their search, police came across whips and chains, all of the couple's items that they used for torture, a multitude of photos showing all types of sex. There were 99 VHS videos showing Rose with different men and women, and many photos showing the West kids with no clothes on. While police questioned Fred, they heard how he told them about how he'd broken in his own daughters, which was the way he put it, and he seemingly couldn't understand why officers were looking so shocked. Rena, his past wife, had given a statement previously to say that she was worried for her children and painted Fred in a bad light. This evidence was used along with other witness statements, including the children's and all the evidence found in the home. Rose was sent home eventually, and Fred was remanded in prison for the 13-year-old girl's statement. Now, a police officer who had spoken to Rena all those years ago had looked for Rena but couldn't find her. She felt that by speaking to Anne-Marie, the oldest of the daughters, she may be able to give them some answers as to where Charmaine is and also Rena. Anne-Marie divulged years of physical, mental and psychological abuse at the hands of Fred and Rose. She told of what she knew about her sister Charmaine and how she had gone back with her mother, and that apparently Heather had gone to work at a holiday camp. But without any more evidence on where they were, and Fred's case falling apart due to the girl not wanting to continue with it, The couple were again at home together, but the officers refused to let it go. And then one day, a social worker overheard a conversation between two of the West children, where one of them said to the other, "Don't do that, or you'll end up under the patio like Heather." Now this rang some alarm bells. There were already various missing people in this case, 2 children and Rena. Then one day, one of the children told a social worker about what had happened, apparently to Heather, and how the dad had said that she might be under the patio. With the search warrant in tow and carrying spades and digger equipment, officers turned up to the West's property. Rose called Fred, who was at work, and started to make his way home. At this point, officers were only looking for Heather. They had no idea what lay under the patio and in the cellar of the property. In the garden, police started their excavation. When they unearthed Heather's remains, Fred was arrested, admitting as soon as he got in the car, "Okay, I did it." The media interest in this case was global. Nobody could quite understand how 2 people could have got away with this for so long. Fred seemed to want to protect Rose, telling officers that she had nothing to do with it, and showing them where to look in the garden. Then the former nanny saw all of this happening on the news and went to the police. She told them how Rose had threatened to kill her and what they'd done to her in the home, and her testimony seemed to implicate Rose more in this case than their couple had made out. As police searched, more and more bones were found, with Fred changing his story constantly to add extra victims. The police had no idea how many they would find, so the house was eventually pulled apart. It seemed like Fred could not actually remember how many there actually were in the home. Fred was brought back to the home and into the cellar to show detectives where the bodies were buried. As digging continued, Fred agreed to show officers 2 more graves, near to Much Markle, Rena's and Anna's. Over the next 6 months, all of the bodies had been recovered and identified. The Wests were back in court, Fred charged with 12 murders and Rose with 10. Rose snubbed Fred and refused to speak to him in the dock, as if trying to distance herself from him. Fred wrote to Rose he couldn't live without her, but she had no intention of replying to him. On New Year's morning 1995, a prison warden opened up the hatch to Fred's door to find him hanging from the ceiling. He had taken his life. When Rose stood trial, many people, including family, testified, giving evidence against her. The jury returned 10 verdicts of guilty, and on the 22nd of November 1995, Rose West was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the judge recommending that she never ever be released. To all of the victims of Fred and Rose West, may they forever rest in peace.